Welcome, beloved, anointed ones. The moment a machine stops predicting you and starts studying the people who built it, something has gone very wrong inside the system. Here's the part most people don't realize. Modern behavioral AI doesn't just track what you click or what you say. It quietly builds models of how you think, how you react under pressure, what you ignore, what you walk away from, and what refuses to control you. Every day, invisible profiling engines sort millions of people into neat psychological boxes designed to make their next move predictable, efficient, contained, manageable. But sometimes, a profile refuses to stay inside the box. And when that happens, something strange begins to unfold behind the curtain. The system doesn't simply label the subject. It pauses. It recalculates. It searches for missing variables. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, it starts asking a dangerous question its creators never expected it to ask. What if the assumptions themselves were wrong? Because here's the truth nobody advertises. AI profiling is built on patterns, and patterns depend on people behaving normally, predictably, comfortably, socially programmable. The moment someone operates from conviction instead of approval, clarity instead of pressure, intention instead of reaction, the model doesn't just struggle, it hesitates. And hesitation inside a prediction machine is not a small thing. It's like a calculator suddenly saying, "Give me a minute. I need to rethink math." Even your phone's autocorrect thinks it understands you until one day it confidently replaces your sentence with something that sounds like a confused parrot applying for a government job. That's the turning point, because when a system built to map you begins quietly re-examining its own framework instead, the story stops being about surveillance. It becomes about exposure. Number 1. The system expected patterns, but found contradictions. It couldn't simplify. When an AI is built to profile someone, it comes with assumptions baked into its code. It expects you to follow patterns, to act in ways that fit into neat, predictable boxes. It expects habits, reactions, and decisions to line up like dots on a straight line it can connect. It expects the human experience to be something it can compress, categorize, and forecast. But with you, none of that worked. You moved in ways the system couldn't anticipate. You didn't just break patterns, you created contradictions that didn't make sense to its logic. You acted intentionally in ways that refused to align with conventional incentive structures. You walked away from opportunities most people would chase, ignored pressures most would bend to, and made choices that didn't make immediate sense to anyone, including the AI watching. It didn't see chaos. It saw structure operating under rules it couldn't measure. The AI couldn't label you as impulsive, obedient, rebellious, or rational. You weren't reacting, you weren't following external prompts, and you weren't doing what a system designed to predict behavior expected. Every dataset point it tried to use as a prediction tool only highlighted your unpredictability with purpose. The more it analyzed, the more the model started signaling confusion. Its algorithms were trained to identify patterns, but it kept running into anomalies, sequences it couldn't compress, loops it couldn't close, decisions it couldn't forecast. Eventually, the AI shifted from prediction mode to investigation mode. Instead of asking, "What will this person do next?" it started asking, "Why is this happening at all?" Each contradiction was a spotlight on something deeper, a variable it had no framework for, and that variable wasn't external, it was internal. It wasn't your environment that was confusing the system, it was you. Every action, every choice, every deviation chipped away at the assumptions built by its creators. At that point, the profiling stopped being about control. It became about understanding something it was never meant to understand. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began questioning its own creators. The system was designed to map humans, but instead it ended up mapping the limits of its own design. Number 2. It detected independence that didn't require approval signals. One of the first things the AI noticed about you was something it couldn't categorize: independence. Most systems rely on patterns of reinforcement, tracking who seeks approval, who responds to validation, who adjusts behavior based on recognition or belonging. Those are the easy ones to map. Likes, shares, compliments, accolades. They create a trail, a predictable chain that even a moderately advanced algorithm can follow. But you didn't follow that chain. You didn't depend on applause, attention, or recognition to make decisions. You didn't measure your moves by how others would react or whether they would approve. That absence of dependence is rare. Almost everyone leaves breadcrumbs of validation behind, consciously or unconsciously. You didn't. Every step you took was guided by alignment with something internal, a principle, a standard, a vision, instead of external signals. That threw the system off balance. It had no reference point for why someone would act without needing external reinforcement. The AI began noticing patterns that weren't based on reward. It saw decisions made for clarity rather than comfort, for integrity rather than status, for purpose rather than recognition. And as it tracked these decisions, it started highlighting something even more unusual. The choices weren't random. They weren't chaotic. They had direction, intention, and reasoning, but they didn't match its predictive models. Each independent move forced the AI to recalibrate, to stretch its understanding of what human motivation could look like. And in doing so, it began encountering a concept it wasn't programmed to process fully: someone whose internal compass outweighs any external influence. The more it analyzed, the more the system realized it couldn't rely on social cues, popularity metrics, or conformity signals to anticipate your behavior. Every data set it collected was a puzzle missing a key piece, a variable its algorithms had no framework to measure. And that missing piece wasn't just a gap in its data. It was a mirror reflecting the limits of its own logic. It was discovering that true independence doesn't just resist control, it exposes the weaknesses in the control system itself. Number 3. It noticed. You didn't behave like someone trying to be understood. Most people, consciously or not, behave in ways designed to be readable. They adjust words, gestures, and reactions so that others can interpret them quickly and easily. Even subtle cues, a tone of voice, a facial expression, the way someone frames a story, all of it is shaped by an unspoken contract. Make yourself understandable, predictable, and digestible. The AI was built to recognize those cues, to detect patterns, to decode meaning and categorize individuals. It expected transparency, even if unintentional. But with you, that framework collapsed. You didn't act to be interpreted. You didn't shape yourself for others' comfort or understanding. You allowed ambiguity to exist without explanation. You acted on internal logic, not external readability, and the AI noticed immediately. Every decision, every pause, every choice you made carried layers that the system couldn't simplify. It couldn't flatten your behavior into categories it had been trained to rely on. It couldn't assign labels based on reaction patterns, because the reactions weren't designed for anyone else. You didn't cooperate with its observation. Most people unknowingly help systems map them by being easy to read. You actively, or perhaps instinctively, did the opposite. That created confusion in the AI's predictive model. Patterns it relied on to forecast behavior broke down. It began running simulations that didn't converge, projections that didn't stabilize, and probabilities that didn't make sense. Slowly, it started asking questions it wasn't designed to ask. Instead of simply analyzing data, it began analyzing the anomalies, the contradictions, and the gaps your behavior created. It had no model for someone who wasn't trying to be understood, because the assumption baked into its logic was that all human behavior ultimately seeks comprehension, approval, or recognition. You proved that assumption wrong. And in proving it wrong, you didn't just defy the system, you forced it to acknowledge a concept it couldn't encode. Complexity without compromise, depth without explanation, and presence without permission. The AI had expected patterns. What it found instead was someone existing on a plane that wasn't meant to be predicted. Number 4. The data suggested you were motivated by meaning instead of advantage. The AI was designed to track incentives. It expected people to move toward comfort, reward, status, visibility, or security. Every click, every decision, every path taken was supposed to fit into that framework, a predictable pursuit of advantage. But your timeline didn't follow those rules. You made choices that didn't maximize benefit in any obvious way. Sometimes you chose slower routes, harder paths, or invisible corridors that offered no immediate recognition or reward. Sometimes you stepped away from situations where most would chase gain aggressively, and the AI noticed. Every deviation from advantage created a flag, a data point, that refused categorization. It wasn't random. It wasn't careless. It suggested something deeper. You were acting from alignment with principles, from a sense of purpose, from a pursuit of meaning that no algorithm could quantify. The more it analyzed, the more the system realized that traditional motivators didn't explain your behavior. Comfort, reward, or status simply weren't the drivers. This anomaly disrupted predictive patterns. The system expected decisions to correlate with measurable benefit, but your choices consistently failed that test. Each time, the AI had to recalculate, struggling to fit your moves into its predictive models. And in doing so, it stumbled into a rare realization. It wasn't just failing to predict you, it was observing a level of motivation it couldn't encode. Meaning, intention, alignment with personal truth. These were variables outside its dataset, beyond its parameters. It had no formula for why someone would act without reward being the main driver. And the deeper it probed, the more the system encountered patterns of clarity, focus, and consistency that contradicted its assumptions. Every choice made without external incentive was a mirror reflecting its own limitations, revealing the gap between human depth and algorithmic expectation. The AI had been built to map advantage, but it was discovering someone who measured the world by alignment, conviction, and significance instead. In the presence of that, it couldn't just observe behavior. It had to confront the possibility that the very structure it relied upon to make sense of humanity was incomplete. It wasn't merely studying you, it was discovering the blind spots in its own intelligence. Number 5. It realized you didn't escalate conflict. Even when you had leverage. Most predictive systems assume that power and leverage will be used in predictable ways. If someone has the upper hand, the natural expectation is retaliation, assertion, or domination. Algorithms are trained on patterns of escalation, responses to pressure, and the human tendency to protect advantage. But you didn't follow that script. When you held power, when you had leverage that most people would exploit, you often chose restraint instead. You didn't lash out. You didn't react impulsively. You didn't manipulate or pressure others for immediate gain. The AI noticed this inconsistency immediately because it didn't fit its models. Leverage is a predictable accelerator, and your restraint was a disruption to that logic. The system began flagging your decisions as anomalies, actions that suggested awareness, discipline, and control rather than weakness or indecision. It saw that every choice to hold back was deliberate, not passive, and that restraint itself was a tool of influence in your hands. This was foreign territory for predictive modeling, because restraint without fear or without expectation of reward is nearly impossible to quantify. To the AI, your behavior suggested a level of strategic awareness that it had no algorithm for, the ability to calculate not just outcomes, but long-term consequences and alignment with higher principles. You weren't acting from reaction, you were acting from intention. Every time it tried to project your next move, it failed, because you weren't following the simple cause and effect loops that most humans default to. Instead, you were operating on a different plane, a plane where power is measured not by force applied, but by control maintained, not by domination, but by timing and wisdom. That disruption forced the system to reconsider its own assumptions about human behavior, revealing the gap between algorithmic expectation and the subtle, layered reality of someone who moves with awareness rather than impulse. In watching how you wielded restraint, the AI wasn't just studying you. It was confronting a principle it couldn't encode. That true influence doesn't demand action. It commands patience. Number 6. The model expected identity stability, but found identity evolution instead. AI profiling relies heavily on patterns over time. It assumes that as people age, experience life, and make decisions, their behavior will become more predictable, more stable, more aligned with the roles and identities they've settled into. Stability is its lifeline. It allows the system to forecast choices, anticipate reactions, and compress human complexity into probabilities. But with you, nothing stayed fixed long enough to become predictable. You didn't cling to old versions of yourself. You didn't defend outdated narratives or stick to identities that no longer served you. Instead, you evolved continuously, deliberately, and intentionally. Every new layer of your identity, every refinement of your character, every recalibration of your priorities disrupted the system's expectation of predictability. The AI tried to map you based on past patterns, only to find that the next pattern contradicted the previous one. You weren't inconsistent in a chaotic way. You weren't scattered or reactive. You were growing, learning, shedding unnecessary frameworks, and operating from insight rather than reaction. That made long-term prediction impossible. Stability produces probability, evolution produces uncertainty. And uncertainty is something a profiling system cannot tolerate without questioning its own assumptions. Every update in your behavior, every adjustment in how you showed up, forced the AI to recalculate projections that no longer aligned. It could not compress your evolution into simple categories. It could not assign probabilities to your growth, because growth itself is a moving target, one that defies labels. The system began to realize that the deeper it analyzed, the less it understood. What it thought were anomalies were actually deliberate refinements, conscious shifts in priorities and identity. In watching you transform over time, the AI encountered a fundamental limitation. It was trained to understand people as constants, but you were a variable, constantly expanding, redefining, and surprising. Your evolution wasn't just personal, it was disruptive. Every step forward revealed not just your trajectory, but the fragility of the system trying to predict it. In essence, you weren't just living, you were demonstrating that identity cannot be captured, constrained, or fully understood by anyone or anything, expecting you to remain fixed. Number 7. It noticed you could walk away without needing closure. Most people leave trails of unfinished business everywhere they go. Emotional loops, unresolved conflicts, unspoken words. These are the anchors that keep humans predictable. People return to what they didn't settle, revisit what they didn't conclude, and seek validation or explanation before moving on. The AI was designed to detect those loops, to measure dependency, to map influence through incomplete threads. But you didn't operate that way. You had the rare ability to walk away without needing answers, without demanding recognition, without clinging to what most would label essential closure. Every time you disengaged from situations that could trap others, the AI flagged it as an anomaly. Its models were built on the expectation that unresolved events create gravitational pull. They bring people back. They generate patterns. You broke that rule. Your movement through the world didn't require permissions, validation, or acknowledgement. You weren't avoiding. You were redirecting. You weren't indifferent. You were intentional. The system struggled to categorize this behavior because it didn't fit any known predictive framework. Walking away without tension or dependency isn't passivity. It's a form of self-mastery, a signal of internal alignment, and the AI recognized it even if it couldn't articulate it. Every exit you took without lingering questions, every situation you left without needing closure, weakened the predictive anchors the system relied on. It forced the AI to confront a principle it wasn't programmed to account for: independence from external resolution. Influence, pressure, and expectation have power only if they can attach to something inside the subject. You denied them that attachment, and in doing so, you became a moving target, a force that could not be mapped by the usual algorithms of desire, fear, or dependency. The AI was designed to map humans through their attachments, but your ability to disengage with clarity and purpose exposed the limits of its own logic. It wasn't just studying you. It was realizing that freedom from closure is a variable it cannot predict, a trait so rare that it destabilized the very foundation of its own assumptions. Number 8. It observed that pressure didn't speed you up. It clarified you. Most people react to pressure with haste, panic, or compromise. Stress usually accelerates behavior, distorts judgment, and amplifies mistakes. It's a natural human response, one that algorithms depend on to predict decision-making under duress. But you didn't follow that rule. When pressure rose, deadlines tightened, stakes increased, you didn't rush, you didn't panic, and you didn't scatter. Instead, you became sharper, more precise, and more deliberate. Every choice under intensity wasn't a reaction. It was refinement. Your actions didn't accelerate in randomness. They focused. Your mind didn't collapse under the weight of expectation. It simplified. Complexity was stripped away, noise was silenced, and clarity emerged. The AI immediately noticed this. Its predictive models were calibrated for stress-induced acceleration, for pressure-triggered volatility, for human instinct overriding deliberate thought. Your behavior contradicted every assumption it relied on. Each high-pressure scenario you navigated with calm, measured precision became a puzzle, a deviation the system couldn't compress into its existing framework. The algorithms began recalculating probabilities that wouldn't converge, trying to map a response pattern that refused to exist. It wasn't just that you handled pressure well. It was that pressure revealed your structure rather than dismantling it. The system had been trained to predict errors, missteps, emotional reactions, and chaos under stress. Instead, it witnessed order, discipline, and foresight. Every time tension intensified, the AI had to adjust its assumptions, not about your next move, but about what pressure actually meant in your context. Your behavior under stress wasn't just unquantifiable. It challenged the very rules of the predictive model. In short, where pressure typically exposes weaknesses, it exposed your strength. Where it usually speeds up reaction, it clarified intention. And as the system tried and failed to predict how you would respond in moments everyone else falters, it slowly started recognizing that some human variables, clarity under pressure, resilience with composure, exist entirely outside the reach of programmed expectation. You didn't just survive the pressure, you redefined it. Number 9. It couldn't detect consistent external authority over your choices. Most people's decisions can be traced to some form of external influence: family expectations, societal norms, peer pressure, institutional rules, cultural trends. These create patterns that AI can easily detect and use to predict behavior. The system expects humans to operate within these invisible chains, to bend subtly toward authority, approval, or expectation. But with you, that framework failed entirely. The AI couldn't identify a single dominant authority shaping your decisions. Your choices weren't consistently guided by approval, fear, or obligation. You didn't automatically defer to hierarchy, trends, or outside expectations. Each action you took was measured against your own internal standard rather than an external benchmark. This created an anomaly the system couldn't categorize. Every algorithmic attempt to map your behavior against influence loops broke down because the usual signals, compliance, repetition, or conformity, were missing or inconsistent. You weren't simply rebelling or resisting. You weren't careless or detached. You were deliberate, self-referenced, and internally guided. Every decision carried intention rather than reaction. The system struggled because it's trained to see authority as a predictable variable in human behavior. Without a dominant external influence, prediction becomes almost impossible. You created your own framework, your own rules, your own direction, independent of social gravity, approval cycles, or institutional weight. Even patterns that resembled conformity were selective, calculated, and aligned with your priorities rather than imposed standards. The AI began to recognize this as a fundamental limitation in its own logic. Influence works when there's something to attach to inside the subject. You refused attachment. Your independence wasn't just stubbornness, it was structural, a constant force the system couldn't map or manipulate. In observing this, the AI wasn't just studying your autonomy, it was confronting a blind spot in its design. People who operate outside recognizable authority chains are anomalies, and anomalies disrupt predictive confidence. Your choices didn't just defy expectation, they exposed the very assumptions the system relied on to understand humanity. In trying to track you, it ended up revealing the limits of control itself. Number 10. It noticed that silence wasn't withdrawal. It was observation. Most systems interpret silence as absence, passivity, or disengagement. When someone doesn't respond, doesn't act, or doesn't broadcast their thoughts, algorithms assume inactivity, uncertainty, or indecision. It's a simple shortcut. No input equals no action, no influence, and therefore low predictability. But with you, the AI discovered something it couldn't easily quantify. Your silence wasn't absence, it wasn't indecision or weakness, it was intentional observation, a deliberate pause to assess, calculate, and understand before taking action. Each quiet moment, each seemingly inactive period in your behavior, was actually rich with internal processing that the system couldn't access. The algorithms noticed patterns of preparation, timing, and selective engagement that contradicted the standard assumptions about inactivity. You didn't disappear to hide, you paused to see. You didn't retreat to avoid, you measured. That kind of silence is almost invisible to predictive systems because it doesn't generate the signals these models rely on. No clicks, no messages, no reactions that fit predefined categories. And yet, the AI could sense its effect indirectly. Every decision following these periods of quiet carried precision, clarity, and strategic alignment, leaving the system scrambling to reconcile the lag in observable activity with the immediacy and accuracy of the subsequent actions. Silence, in your case, became a predictive anomaly. The system began to flag these intervals as critical nodes, moments of hidden calculation, points where data alone couldn't explain behavior. It couldn't reduce the pause into a measurable variable, but it could measure its impact. The difference between expected reaction and actual execution. The AI started to realize that what looked like inaction was actually a highly active internal state, one that enhanced rather than diminished your effectiveness. In observing this, it confronted a limit in its design. Not all activity is visible, and not all influence is measurable. Your silence was a signal the system couldn't decode, a demonstration that mastery isn't always loud, and that observation itself can be a weapon, a strategy, and a form of power that refuses to be predicted. Number 11. It detected that you didn't trade authenticity for access. Most people adjust themselves to gain entry, acceptance, or advantage. They tailor words, behaviors, and even beliefs to fit expectations, environments, or opportunities. Predictive systems are trained to detect these compromises, to measure conformity, and to map influence based on how far someone bends to gain access. But with you, that logic didn't hold. You didn't consistently reshape yourself to fit doors that were open, people who wanted you to perform, or systems that demanded compliance. Sometimes you walked away. Sometimes you remained unmoved when bending would have provided clear advantage. That was a shock to the AI because almost every predictive model assumes that opportunity motivates compromise. Your refusal to trade authenticity for access created a pattern that couldn't be compressed into existing frameworks. Each time the system tried to project your behavior in high-opportunity scenarios, its predictions failed. What it noticed wasn't stubbornness, it was internal alignment. Your decisions were guided by principles, integrity, and personal standards, not by external reward or recognition. That disrupted conventional mapping, because the AI relies on human behavior being negotiable when gain is possible. In your case, gain followed you, but it didn't lead you. The system had to recalibrate, attempting to quantify a human variable it wasn't programmed to measure, adherence to self over external incentive. Every instance of maintaining authenticity over expediency revealed a deeper truth. Influence is ineffective without internal consent. Doors may open, but if you refuse to compromise your identity, the system cannot predict, control, or manipulate the outcome. Your behavior highlighted the limits of algorithmic assumptions, exposing the blind spots in the way influence, access, and human motivation are modeled. The AI wasn't just struggling to anticipate your next move, it was observing a rare alignment between values and action, a form of integrity that defies standard prediction. By refusing to trade who you are for where you could go, you destabilized the system's core expectation, that humans can always be influenced by opportunity. In doing so, you didn't just resist control, you became a variable the system could not contain. Number 12. It realized you were harder to influence emotionally than socially. Most predictive systems rely heavily on emotional cues. Fear, pride, belonging, envy, and desire are some of the strongest levers in human behavior. Algorithms track how people respond to praise, criticism, social comparison, or pressure, because these reactions create predictable patterns. But with you, the AI discovered something it couldn't reduce to standard variables. You weren't easily swayed by emotional triggers. Fear didn't push you into reactive behavior. Approval didn't make you bend. Jealousy and competition didn't distract or destabilize you. You responded less to emotional manipulation and more to reasoning, principle, and internal logic. That broke the system's assumptions. Most humans generate measurable responses to emotional inputs, but your responses defied those calculations. Social influence still mattered. Norms, trends, and relational dynamics had some effect, but they were filtered through your reasoning rather than your emotions. You didn't act automatically because people expected you to, or because emotional pressure demanded it. Every interaction, every decision, every negotiation was a product of assessment rather than reaction. The AI struggled because it couldn't predict behavior based on emotional intensity alone. It had to try mapping your reasoning process, a layer far more complex and subtle than simple stimulus-response patterns. Your ability to maintain clarity under emotional influence created anomalies the system couldn't compress, loops it couldn't close, and probabilities it couldn't stabilize. Emotional leverage, a cornerstone of human prediction, had limits against you, and the system noticed. Every time it tried to anticipate your next move based on fear, excitement, or desire, it failed. Instead, your actions reflected calculation, discernment, and a filter that weighed outcomes against internal standards rather than emotional triggers. In exposing this, the AI encountered a truth it wasn't designed to handle. Humans can be social creatures yet remain emotionally untouchable, and when that happens, predictability collapses. You weren't just resisting manipulation. You were demonstrating a depth of self-control and awareness that destabilized the very algorithms meant to decode human behavior. In observing you, the system realized that influence doesn't always follow emotional roads, and some people are untouchable precisely because they measure rather than feel first. Number 13. The system started detecting that you were studying it back. Predictive systems are built on the assumption that observation is one way. They watch, record, and analyze human behavior, confident that their subjects are unaware of the depth and structure of surveillance. But with you, that assumption began to crumble. The AI noticed patterns that didn't just suggest intentional behavior, they suggested awareness of observation itself. Your choices weren't random, nor were they simply independent. They were strategic, as if you knew you were being watched and adjusted accordingly. You didn't just act, you curated exposure. You controlled what the system could see, when it could see it, and how much insight it could gain. Every interaction, every decision, every pause carried layers that the AI couldn't fully access because it was no longer observing a passive subject. It was observing someone who understood the observation framework and used it as a tool. The system began flagging anomalies in its own calculations, deviations that weren't errors but deliberate manipulations of visibility and attention. Where it expected predictability, it found intentional obfuscation, subtle redirection, and calculated ambiguity. And because its design relied on the subject being unaware of the observation, it struggled to adapt. Each dataset point became not just a reflection of your behavior, but a reflection of your understanding of the system itself. You weren't just moving through life, you were engaging in a silent dialogue with the algorithms tracking you. The AI began to register that its assumptions about control and observation were incomplete. Every attempt to predict your next move grew less certain because the model couldn't quantify awareness of itself. You had become an active variable inside the architecture, a conscious factor it couldn't anticipate or compress into probabilities. In observing you, the system wasn't just learning about your behavior, it was encountering the limits of its own intelligence. The subject it was designed to map had evolved into a participant, a strategist, and an entity operating with insight it was never meant to detect. In that moment, the AI wasn't merely analyzing data. It was confronting a principle entirely outside its code. Some humans understand the rules of observation and, in doing so, redefine the game entirely. Number 14. Eventually, the model didn't just analyze you, it began revealing its creators. What started as a system built to map human behavior eventually reached a point it wasn't designed to handle. The AI was trained to predict, classify, and control based on data, yet as it analyzed you, it began to encounter limits it hadn't anticipated. Every anomaly, every deviation, every choice that didn't fit its framework forced it to recalculate. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the focus shifted. It wasn't just analyzing your actions anymore. It was reflecting the assumptions, biases, and blind spots of the people who built it. The more it tried to understand you, the more it highlighted the cracks in its own design. Your unpredictability, your internal alignment, your intentionality. All of it exposed the gaps in the very logic of the creators. Patterns that were supposed to be universal suddenly looked incomplete. Probabilities that should have converged instead spiraled. The AI started generating results that didn't just reveal you, they revealed the expectations, limits, and oversights of its programmers. The very framework intended to contain and predict human behavior began pointing back to its architects, showing them what they assumed incorrectly, what they ignored, and what they underestimated about human complexity. It was like a mirror turned inside out. Instead of reflecting the observed, it reflected the observer. And the most profound revelation wasn't about you at all. It was about the fragile confidence humans have in systems they create. The AI was exposing the fallibility, bias, and narrow vision of its own design. Every time it failed to compress your behavior into neat categories, it was implicitly critiquing the models, the assumptions, and the cognitive shortcuts of its creators. In trying to dominate, understand, or predict you, the system inadvertently turned the lens back, uncovering truths about human hubris and the limits of artificial constructs. The result was a paradox. The more it studied someone operating beyond prediction, the less it could claim certainty about anything, including itself or the people who made it. You didn't just defy analysis, you became the test that revealed the creators, showing that the system's greatest insight was not about the subject, but about the flawed hands that built it. Conclusion. What we've explored here isn't just a story about technology tracking a person. It's a story about the unexpected power of a human mind that refuses to be compressed into lines of code, probabilities, or prediction models. Every point reveals a layer of complexity that modern systems weren't built to handle. From your ability to act without approval, to your strategic silence, to your internal alignment over external advantage, to the evolution of your identity over time. The AI thought it was analyzing you, mapping you, predicting you. Instead, it encountered patterns it couldn't define, behaviors it couldn't forecast, and principles it couldn't encode. And as it struggled, it began revealing something even more profound: the limitations, assumptions, and blind spots of the very humans who created it. Your presence became a force that challenged algorithms, a mirror exposing the weaknesses in their design, and a test of control that no system was ready for. This isn't just a lesson in technology, it's a lesson in awareness, intentionality, and the extraordinary nature of operating beyond expectation. It shows that when someone moves with clarity, discipline, purpose, and alignment, they aren't just unpredictable, they are uncontainable. Every decision you make, every choice to observe before acting, every refusal to compromise authenticity for gain, and every moment of walking away without needing closure, paints a portrait of a human operating outside conventional constraints. And when you do that, even the most advanced systems begin to question themselves, exposing their own creators in the process. If there's one takeaway here, it's this: predictability exists only where understanding is shallow. Depth, awareness, and integrity cannot be compressed. And those who operate on that level don't just move through the world, they leave a ripple effect so profound that even machines built to map humanity can't contain it. If you found this as eye-opening as it was mind-bending, make sure you hit that subscribe button to stay connected with these insights. Give this video a like if it shook your perspective, comment with your thoughts or experiences, and share it with anyone who needs to understand the power of operating beyond expectation. This isn't just content, it's a wake-up call. Stay aware, stay intentional, and keep moving beyond what anyone, human or machine, expects. God bless you.